what do we mean by debris? Well, for starters, the usual suspects. From the very beginning, we skimmed off the learning styles and multiple intelligences and brain gym whenever they surfaced. I used to keep a range of debunking articles in my bottom drawer to hand up whenever these things cropped up. And I had them at several levels of technical complexity so that I could give the sort of simple version or the sort of full-on academic analysis depending on who I was talking to. And more recently, many of the people here at this conference have been doing a fantastic job in covering issues like this. I only wish some of them had been around 8 or 9 years ago, that the world had been where it is now 8 or 9 years ago. But it felt quite lonely then. And things like John Hattie's work and book have been helpful for reinforcing this, sometimes just by making clear that a strand of work that absolutely isn't bad in itself may be better replaced by other higher value things. It can help people to let go. So when our education team visits schools or reviews school development plans or is talking to heads or teachers, it brings a certain clarity about what's real education and what's debris, and so feeds back where it's necessary. And some of this feedback also comes through governing bodies, but we don't rely on it happening there. The composition and attendance and variability of governing bodies, we can't be sure that everything will happen through that channel. So we have got things set up to have these conversations within ARC schools itself. So then there's the second piece, which is feeding the right things in. We have a document that sets out the essential characteristics of an ARC school, and we've tried to make sure that it doesn't embed anything that doesn't have some evidential justification. It really is not a how to please Ofsted sort of document. It's actually quite light in the area of curriculum and teaching, and our schools do genuinely have a lot of freedom. But there are just a few things that we do put into our schools. Those are swimming pool chemicals, by the way, surely gel. All our primary schools do use read-write. There are a lot of literacy programs now that pretty much fit that Diane McGuinness template in terms of substance. And we also based our decision on the relative ease of implementation in schools, including the newly arrived transitions. And it's quite helpful to have a common program from a point of view of training and development, and for letting the experienced schools help the new arrivals. That's one. Maths. I should have said, we absolutely don't set out to look at all aspects of everything that happens in schools. We have far too small a central team. Our efforts are focused particularly on English and literacy, on maths, and on music. I haven't got time to go into the why music today. Maths, we always recognise that this was absolutely fundamental in our schools, especially with the shortage of high-quality experienced maths teachers in this country. Structurally, it's always going to be harder to get people into schools to teach maths. And a few years ago, we'd gone some way on maths, but we still weren't happy with what was happening. And we drew up another template for the characteristics of a good maths program. And at that point, we very nearly had somebody write it, but we just decided to look around first. And we found that the Singapore primary curriculum actually fitted the template remarkably closely. So now we're using the mathematics mastery adaptation of that in all of our primary schools, and and having extended it to secondary in, I'm going to get this wrong, I think it's now in years 7 and 8 of all but one of our secondary schools. I'll come back to maths mastery a bit in a moment. There are various other pieces. I wish I could talk for a couple of hours today, but this gives you a flavour. It's quite few and selective, the places where we actually have something common in all our schools. We are, going forward, going to be developing an English programme, sort of parallel the maths programme. We have decided that there would be some value in having some commonality in all the schools that want to sign up to it. This will not be something that is compulsory, but it will be something that schools will be encouraged to join, and we hope that, like the secondary maths mastery, that the great majority will choose to. talking a little bit about maths mastery before I come back to ARC generally, because this is the one of our programs that has evolved into sort of full-blown RCT. And it's really exciting. I think it started with 30 primary schools, and we've now got, I think, also 70 secondary schools in the secondary trial. Most of these schools are outside the ARC network. It's funded by the EEF. All the schools are higher poverty than average and higher SEN than average. This is not completely random selection of schools in that sense. And we've got it set up from the beginning with a very strong study design and a very good team evaluating it. There are the full details can be found on the EEF website. I won't give them all here, but we have a sort of dream evaluation team with Anna Vignoles leading on the primary evaluation and John Jerrim leading on the secondary. Really looking forward to that. I'm not going to try and talk about the slides, especially given this lovely light room, but it's going pretty well so far. We've been very successful in the recruitment. All the schools participating seem to be finding it sort of rewarding and exciting to be part of. The preliminary results we're not allowed to talk about, but are encouraging. But the EEF has all the evaluations set up, and unfortunately it's not going to be till the end of next year that we will really have a good idea, so we're still hoping. So I'll come back into the third element of the swimming pool system, which is the testing, the feedback loops. They are really important. And one of these is data, and we could talk indefinitely about data, and I don't want to get started on that and on national curriculum levels today. We've done a lot, but there's always more to do. We were probably a little oversimplistic in our thinking when we began. This is one of the areas where we could have done better, but the removal of national curriculum levels is making us do some really timely rethinking about how we think about progress, what we should be tracking, and what we should be looking at network level in making the right feedback loops. Because the point of those feedback loops is always to get the right conversations happening in schools, between schools and the centre, sort of everywhere. We try to stay focused on that. At the end of the day, it's the right conversations that make things change. We use school visits and monitoring. We have quite a structured monitoring process, and several years ago we brought in a peer monitoring strand in that. Now almost all our schools, heads and often other members of their senior teams are involved in the monitoring process, and that's been incredibly powerful. It's having the heads visiting each other's schools, seeing other schools' strengths and reflecting on those, and bringing in feedback on the contrasts. Everybody seems to like it, and it seems to have really helped. Though, as always, the challenge is actually getting the feedback acted on. So the last thing I'm going to talk about, and I seem to be doing a shorter talk than others. I assumed that there was going to be some time for questions. I hope that's what people expected. Are two of the most important mechanisms that we use. Oh, I had a nice tester. One of these is around the various mechanisms to get networks and teams going across the whole group of schools. And we have various levels here. One, obviously, we have as a principals network, finance and resource directors, various admin and back office networks, and also the sort of most important of all are the subject hubs. And we put a lot of effort into building these subject hubs because they have to do all of those three things: the skimming, the introducing good stuff, and the promoting feedback loops. Each of them meets regularly. We have a big network day once a year where everybody is there, but we also have hub days where the people responsible for each hub can design and plan for that particular network. Most recently, I went to a music hub for a session on assessment in music, and it was fantastic because I could see all of these things happening. It was a forum which really encouraged the right conversation. It wasn't people sort of sitting yawning thinking, how much longer is somebody going to go on talking about something that that really is of no relevance to what I'm doing at all. It actually worked as a sort of proper professional development day. And getting these right, what it does is to promote a virtuous circle. It keeps up the quality of what happens in schools, but at the same time, it makes all the feedback and development happen the other way, because having a collective sort of ARC schools approach is only valuable if that's being shaped by the right people who ultimately are the teachers and the people who are working directly with it. So the point of the model is to make sure that it is constantly influenced by the people who should have the greatest say in making sure that it really works. And that's especially true in a world where there are endless sort of outside influences on schools, and there are sort of short-term pressures from accountability systems, from all manner of other things. How do you keep that sort of integrity, purpose, clarity, direction in the face of all the things that sort of jostle you and jolt you day to day? So, underwater teams. It's this because, in a sense, these teams sort of operate under the sort of very visible, sort of direct subject groups in schools, but they are nevertheless important in making it happen. And then the second mechanism I want to talk about is we take training and development in the network really, really seriously. We have a multi-layered approach, as I said, with network, subject, another hub, and school level development. And we've thought a lot about what goes into that, and we use staff feedback from these events a great deal to try and shape, to make the programs as useful and immediately relevant to people as possible. We've made a lot of use of Doug Lemov's work in our training. I don't know if anybody here works in an ARC school, but the Teach Like a Champion book has been very useful for providing sort of good basis for network training. And his more recent book, Practice Perfect, makes the point very well about the importance of actually practicing things that professional development trains people in. So a little illustration of what an ARC inset day in another universe might look like. It's a Brazilian water polo team, but I love it. I particularly love the way that one of these guys, the second one down on the left, you can see has absolutely got the exercise, and the others are all still sort of working their way up to being able to do it properly. And that music day that I just talked about, it really echoed this in its own way. It was a day that was designed to give everybody the chance to practice the things they were discussing, with sort of groups taking it in turns. It really worked. Nobody was sitting sort of brainstorming 1,000 uses of paper clips or doing any of the horrific things that I've been reading tweets about over the last couple of weeks from some people's sort of back-to-school inserts. Mind-blowing, actually, seeing how some of that time gets spent. It's really important. Teachers have scarce time, and it's extraordinarily important to use it well. And the last picture I'm going to inflict on you. When it all works, what happens in schools is sort of just awe-inspiring. And people like me in the centre can sort of sit back and enjoy the fact that our own role makes us sort of roughly the equivalent of the sort of flaps in the side of the swimming pool. But more seriously, the sort of explosion in thinking that this conference reflects is sort of very exciting for us all. So I've deliberately kept this sort of fairly short so that we have some time for questions. And I had hoped, Lucy Heller, who's the ARC Chief Executive, was also supposed to be here, but I've been getting texts from her about her travel problems this morning. So alas, she's not here, so I'll have to take them on my own. So thank you. How are we doing on time? I think we have about 10 minutes for questions, if I have followed the timetable correctly. So very happy. If anybody else, can you put your hands up if you've got a question, and I'll take 2 or 3 if that's okay, and then answer them. How do we gather and access research? How have we done it? Yes. There was another question levels. How are we going to track progress and set targets? Any others, or shall I go for those two. Okay. On how do we gather and access research? I came down initially, though not now entirely to me, because I had just finished an MA in comparative education at the Institute when I joined ARC, the Institute of Education, and there I had become particularly interested in educational approaches and curricula that was most effective with the most disadvantaged children. And I very nearly stayed on to do a PhD, so I actually spent several months on a sort of literature review, reading a lot of US research as well as UK. So that was the sort of germ, was that reading. So we had an awareness, and then taking that out, and from that having a preliminary knowledge of who would be good people to talk to, and testing aspects of the thinking on various people to see and to help cross-check on the credibility of the various things we were reading. So it was a sort of a gentle evolution, I think. In terms of now, we're plugged into a lot of research networks, different people from ARC, attend a lot of events, follow Twitter, read a lot of blogs, and so we pass around, where there are interesting papers, we always sort of try and pass them around and make sure that people who are likely to have the time and be interested in reading have a chance to read and talk to others. So it's quite informal. Daisy, whose name I haven't yet learnt to pronounce properly, Christodoulou, who starts on Monday, one of her first jobs will be actually about systematizing this a bit more, now that we have 27 schools, to try and make sure that it's a bit less ad hoc than it's been in the past. With the death of levels, how will we track progress and set targets? I'm afraid we don't yet have the answer to that. In fact, I can tell you I spent an hour talking to the chair of Ofsted about this only last week. We have got a whole series of sessions set up. The music hub that I talked about, that was one of the topics there, was assessment in music. In fact, quite a lot of that session was starting with, well, what have been the drawbacks of levels? What do we want to unbundle? What are we really happy to lose them for? Because to get people to a point where they weren't just sort of regretting the good things, because there's, as with everything else, there's much that's good and much that's bad about national curriculums or any other measurement system. So without losing sight of what's been good and is going to be hard to replace, we wanted to make people sort of at least positive about having a chance to lose some of the stuff that's less productive. We are working through the subject groups. We're trying to look subject by subject at the needs of the individual subjects, because what's clear is that one of the problems with the level system was trying to bring something sort of uniform to different subject matter that actually sort of builds up intellectually and practically in very different ways. So that the first shot is at trying to get something subject specific, at least in all the main subjects. But we're at a very early stage of working it out. And anybody who wants to talk to me about their thinking on that, I would be absolutely delighted. Feel free to get in touch, because this is a wide open conversation. Other questions? There's one there. Any others? Just okay. I've got three. One, so 2, 3. To what extent have we used research from overseas and built it in? Okay, that one. There was one here. Okay. At what point? So the example of the sorry, I'm supposed to be repeating them back. The small school model. How do we know when something's not working and when we should give up or adjust and do something different? Starting with research overseas. Education research in this country, in some areas is sort of fantastic, and in some areas is sort of quite limited and patchy. In different countries, there are different emphases and areas of interest. Actually, it's fascinating when you compare sort of US and UK research to see sort of how extraordinarily different the sort of main education discourse can be, despite actually, apparently, the countries having to deal with some pretty similar problems. So some of it was sort of looking for confirmation when there's not very much sort of in the UK. Some of it has been where things have very clearly been sort of led outside the UK. So So for example, the sort of charter school strand of research in the US, quite a lot of work done there, very variable quality, but quite a lot to look at and to think about. Some stuff on chains of schools more widely, coming across to the how big can the swimming pool go. We keep quite a careful eye on what work there is. There's not very much. The World Bank is tracking sort of chains of schools around the world, and Harry Petrinos there says that he hasn't yet seen anything that suggests there is a natural limit, but we're fundamentally quite cautious. We haven't grown our own chain at anything like the rate of a lot of other academy chains, although we have just added 6 primary schools and 3 secondary schools this week, so that may sound a bit sort of contradictory. But nevertheless, we took it very slowly in the early years. We're very alive to that and sort of ready and expecting at some point that there will be a sort of natural fragmentation into a set of networks rather than trying to maintain everything in sort of one giant network. Because if the forum for discussion gets too big, then you're right, it's hard to see that you can really maintain it as a conversation. How do we know when to stop? This comes down very much to the quality of conversations that we have as within these networks and within the centre and at the board. We've put a lot of effort into trying to promote a culture of sort of honest conversation. It's 2 things. One is making explicit what the drivers are, and all that early work I talked about was really helpful in that we had made explicit what we thought the drivers were the model were. And we have something, a sort of consumer version that we use for parents and sort of new schools, 6 pillars. So what are the essential ingredients of an ARC school? So making things explicit so that you can readily look back and say, is that stacking up in practice? And the second piece is being able to have the conversations without anybody feeling that their entire sort of credibility disappears if an element of the model has to be changed. And that hasn't always been easy, it has to be said, but Lucy, who isn't here, that's been one of her triumphs as chief executive from the very beginning, has been making a culture where things can be discussed sort of openly and honestly, and sort of exemplifying that herself always. And without that, I think it would be hard to do. So there's a great deal about organizational culture in that. I'm looking at the time. I suspect Tom is here to. Yes. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your questions. And if you want to ask me more, please feel free to come up and talk or to email me. I'm really, really happy to talk. And thank you to Tom for organizing.